Welcome to today's program brought to you by the U.S. Botanic Garden. My name is Courtney Burris, the online education specialist with the Learning and Outreach team here at the USBG in Washington, D.C. For today's program, we will be providing live transcription services. So please click the link shared in the chat to access that service. We're so happy to have you joining us online this summer for this special Plants and Music programming series where we explore the realm of plant music and meet musicians, sound designers, inventors, and researchers who create and utilize innovative technologies to engage with plants in remarkable ways. Get ready for a truly unique and educational experience. Today's program, Beats and Botany, is an online talk and Q&A presented by musicians and plant lovers Libby Hanssen, Tracy Bass, Audrey Watson, the original creators of Beats and Botany, the exhibit at the University of Missouri Kansas City Music Media Library. This Beats and Botany team has come back together to present an exciting overview of the long entwining relationship between plants, music, and humans. This is an awesome closing to our 5-part Plants and Music summer series. Libby Hanssen is a writer based in Kansas and the author of States of Swing, the history of the Kansas City Jazz Orchestra from 2003 to 2023. Additionally, her writing is published in KC Studio, KCUR 89.3, 91.9, Classical KC, the Kansas City Star, and The Pitch. She worked for the UMKC Music Media Library from 2008 to 2023, and she loves to imagine what's next for her garden. Tracy Bass is head librarian with the Omaha Symphony and a freelance performer and teacher across the Midwest. He has a doctorate in horn performance from UMKC Conservatory and worked for the Music Media Library from 2017 to 2021. As a houseplant enthusiast, Tracy is most proud of owning over 20 species of ficuses. Audrey Watson is a Kansas City-based audio engineer and musician working primarily at the UMKC Conservatory. She studied music at UMKC and worked for the Music Media Library from 2020 to 2023. She enjoys keeping houseplants, foraging, and learning about flora and fungi. Welcome, the curators of Beats and Botany.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having us. I'm Tracy, and like they said, I'm currently working as an orchestra librarian, which is one of those random jobs you wouldn't know was a job unless you had a reason to. While my current job doesn't involve creating fun and informative displays like we did during my time at UMKC, I do have over 40 plants around my library space that help create a welcoming environment for our musicians. It's been a pleasure to reconnect with my colleagues and reflect on what may be my favorite display we created during my time in the Music Media Library. So let's dive right into what a Music Media Library collection display is and why we make them. The Music Media Library is at the University of Missouri Kansas City and is housed in the Miller-Nichols Library, and it primarily serves students in the UMKC Conservatory of Music, Theater, and Dance. Our MM library displays revolve around a theme that highlights items that can be found in the MM collection, with the opportunity of pulling items from other university library collections as well. Our collection mainly consists of books and scores from the music classification, but we also house the media for the university libraries, which is mostly made up of like CDs and DVDs. Courses taught across all subjects on campus have access to and utilize those resources held in our collection, and the displays we create offer a way for visitors to discover new types of materials they may not have known about. Some examples of other displays we have created are A Perfect Pairing, which is about music and cats, The Art of Improv, which was with the UMKC Conservatory Improvisatory Ensemble, Diversify Your Repertoire, which was about using library research guides to build diverse recital programs, Sound Bites, Terrifying Tales and Tunes for Halloween, Cartoons to Improvise, Experimentation and Exploration of Graphic Notation for Music, Common Imagination, which was about music and community in the puppetry arts, Harmony of the Spheres, which we did for the 2017 solar eclipse. Ready to Rock, which was about rock gongs, singing stones, and musical minerals. Music of Suffrage, which was raising your voice, casting your vote, and celebrating 100 years of women's suffrage. And Play On, which was all centered around video game music. One display that has helped us celebrate our resources and its growing purpose of providing diverse repertoire for students was about our Shining a Light collection. Shining a Light is a scoring website initiative that was partially funded by a UM system grant to encourage research opportunities for projects that focus on diversity, equity, inclusivity, and underrepresented groups. What started as an initial edition of 55 works in 2019 has turned into almost 1,000 pieces that continues to grow to this day. Each year, the library hosts a concert where students of the conservatory can apply to perform works from the Shining a Light collection. The process for creating one of our displays begins with an idea, usually from within the Music Media Library's student assistant staff, and that leads someone down a rabbit hole of research within the Music Media Library collection, and then onto the other collections available around the UMKC campus. Some of the other collections we pull from are the Miller-Nichols Library, which is home to the general collection for the overall university. And then we also have the Mars Sound Archives, which house items like LPs, cylinders, open reel tapes, CDs, and digital audio files. One of my favorite parts of building a display was exploring the LP collection in the Mars Sound Archives to choose intriguing covers that we were able to borrow and put on exhibit across from the little nook where the main displays were housed. We use these collections, all of these collections around the university, to build a resource list, and then from there we began creating a narrative about the display, as well as selecting visual elements that can be incorporated into the display with any supplemental materials. We've made bookmarks, little signs for the display, informative pamphlets, playlists, things like that. Before Audrey discusses how she came up with her idea for Beats in Botany, I can't forget to mention our display called Lake Goblins that was designed around a Marimo moss ball, which is technically an algae, that one of our student workers purchased and went on to become a staple in the Music Media Library. We had a contest to find a name for the ball and ended up calling her Diana Moss, and she became a feature in many library displays and social media posts that circulated at the time.
Thank you, Tracy, for giving us a really comprehensive overview of what our displays are like. I'm Audrey Watson, and like Courtney said earlier, I'm an audio engineer and musician working in Kansas City. I'd like to talk a little bit about how we chose the topic of Beats in Botany for this display. Nature stimulates the senses of artists, branching out in unexpected ways. Oliver Sacks, a British neurologist and naturalist, once said, "In 40 years of medical practice, I have found only two types of non-pharmaceutical therapy to be vitally important for patients with chronic neurological diseases: music and gardens." For a lot of musicians, creating music and being involved in music feels like a source of life, just like plants are. It's no surprise that there comes such a correlation between the two. Some composers found inspiration in their experiences in nature, emulating that experience in the concert hall. The bloom of a rose, the tendrils of a climbing vine, the majesty of the redwoods have been propagated with scores and sounds. Some even use plant material to make music. Like many other people, I picked up the hobby of keeping houseplants during the COVID-19 lockdowns in 2020. When we were finally able to go back to in-person operations at the music library, I knew that music and plants would be a great theme for one of our displays, since several colleagues of mine had also invited the joy of houseplants into their lives. I dove into our catalog and, with the help of Libby and Tracy, discovered that we had lots of pertinent material for this theme. My idea was also greatly influenced by my love of the album on the shirt I'm wearing in this picture. It's called Mother Earth's Plantasia, and it's by Mort Garson. And even though we didn't have a copy of it in our collection, I thought that we could find a lot of other things similar to it.
One goal when we're doing research for a display is finding sources that span a broad reach of time. Composers and musicians alike have taken inspiration from plants for hundreds of years, so this was an easier task for this display. Composers like Ludwig van Beethoven, Gustav Mahler, and Thea Musgrave all drew influence from the seasons in their works. But few pieces in history have seen the popularity that Vivaldi's Four Seasons continues to have today. Written in the 18th century, Vivaldi's Spring movement celebrates the return of life through thunderstorms, birds, and new growth. This work contains a narrative element that pairs with four sonnets, a style of writing that would later be known as program music. I'm sure we have all heard this tune before, but how many of you knew its representation? Let's take a little listen. All right, composer and pianist Clara Schumann's Flower Diary from 1857 to 1859 was preserved and has been published into a volume that highlights her life after her husband Robert's death. The image to the right is an example of her meticulous organization. This journal was used as a way for her to reflect on her travels around Europe as a performer and her connection to friends such as Johannes Brahms. Puccini's Chrysantheme, or Chrysanthemum, was written for string quartet after he learned about the passing of a dear friend who was a former king of Spain. In Italy, chrysanthemums are the flowers of mourning used for funerals and gravesites. Okay, in 1982, Howard Ashman's Little Shop of Horrors premiered. Orchestrated by Alan Menken, in this musical, the character Audrey finds herself trying to escape an abusive relationship. Jolong's Four Seasons is a contemporary approach to what is written for unaccompanied treble choir, set to Chinese poems from the Song dynasty, and specifically the reign from 1037 to 1101. His spring movement, like Vivaldi's, is a celebration of the earth warming and life returning to peach blossoms and bamboo. Chen Yi's Plum Blossom for solo piano is based on the Cantonese children's song Moonlight, which is inspired by plum blossoms, which in the Chinese culture symbolizes nobility, elegance, perseverance, independence, and faithfulness. This single movement work explores each of those traits through variations. Let's listen to the opening theme of this piece.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. We got through it. That was good. Okay, so like Courtney said, I'm Libby Hanssen. I'm a freelance writer and a full-time mom of both kids and plants. But I was with the UMKC Music Media Library for nearly 15 years, and making displays was easily my favorite part of the job, as it combined research and writing and graphic design and like working together with my colleagues like Tracy and Audrey to find creative ways to showcase our collection. So it is an oft repeated folk practice that it's a good idea, a good practice to talk to your plants, but what do you think would happen if you sang to them? And this is a question that people have been curious about. So they've been curious about the influence of sound on plant growth for over 100 years, if not before then. Scientists and pseudoscientists alike examine how vegetation responds to certain frequencies and to different types of music. So in the 1880s, Charles Darwin played his bassoon to see if his Mimosa pudica, which is a touch-sensitive plant, would close its leaves due to the vibrations coming from the instrument. And his efforts were without results, though, in what he called a fool's experiment. Now, this picture that you see is an AI-generated image of Charles Darwin playing bassoon to his plant. And as you may recognize, that the AI had no idea what a bassoon looked like. So that is not a bassoon, but it is a fairly good picture of Charles Darwin. But anyway, much effort has been made to dismiss. So many of these types of experiments have been dismissed by experts and amateurs, but there's actually quite a bit of evidence to support the claim that music affects plants. So coinciding with the rise of easily obtainable, like recording playback technology, experiments could extend over a long period of time and also be consistent. In the early 20th century, Indian scientist Sir Jagadish Chandra Bose ran experiments on plants to see how they responded to many different stimuli, including sound, and found that plants responded favorably to raga. And in a 1962 study conducted by Dr. T.C. Singh, also a scientist from India, it was determined that balsam plants responded well to both classical Western music and raga, seeing an increase of about 20% in height and 72% in biomass when exposed to the music. Dr. Singh and others conducted a variety of experiments on plants using music, many of which conclude that music definitely affects plant growth. Though some experiments indicate plants respond better to classical music, particularly string music, rather than rock or country or metal, various experiments used all sorts of music, from jazz to opera to organ. One study found that classical and waltz music had positive effects on the germination of alfalfa seeds, while different elements like scale, volume, and rhythmic complexity may affect root growth. So these experiments and others influenced musical plant enthusiasts to create music specifically for the benefit of plants, though we found that humans also have enjoyed a lot of this music too. So I'm going to share with you a few different examples that we used in our display. What you see here is an album produced by former dentist and amateur horticulturist George Milstein, and it's called Music to Grow Plants. It's pretty clear. It was released in 1970 and based on his research. And it includes a really lush score that harkens to the era's lounge jazz explorations. He included high-frequency sounds, some of which are inaudible to humans, designed to encourage plant growth. And we are going to hear a snippet from that album, though I should warn you, it starts with just a few seconds of that very high-pitched tone. The clip is about 30 seconds. And so next we have the book Plant Craft, which was published in 1973. It is A Growing Compendium of Sound Indoor Gardening with Sound by Janet Cox. It's beautiful, it's educational, and it's honest. This collection of stories and detailed information for caring for common houseplants includes whimsical hand-drawn illustrations by Win Ing. And you can see that this picture is from the cover of the book. And so it's all sorts of different plants and different scenarios. Cox references many of the same experiments that we've discussed and suggests that musical stimuli is essential for healthy indoor plants. To that end, the book includes a vinyl record with compositions by Keith Zeichenfuss called Quartet in the Green Key for Strings. And sometimes artists would take existing music and record it with the intention of it being played for plants. In Anne Chase's 1967 album, A Chant for Your Plants, she uses an arrangement of Eric Satie's Gymnopédie No. 1 for piano and flute along with spoken word. The chant begins, "What tranquility a quiet life affords. I am listening to my thoughts. They sound like a rhapsody in green. My thoughts are with you, dear plants. You are such wonders to me." And so Mother Earth's Plantasia by Mort Garson was originally released in 1976 and then was reissued in 2019. It was a bit of a cult classic. And as Audrey said earlier, it was one of the main inspirations for this display. So Garson was inspired to make the album because of his wife's many houseplants, and he composed the whole album on Moog synthesizer. There are 10 tracks, all intended for different types of plants, including Symphony for Spider Plant and Music to Soothe the Savage Snake Plant. And here is a snippet from Concerto for Philodendron and Pothos. And so a big inspiration for this whole concept came from the book, The Secret Life of Plants, which was very popular. And authors Peter Tompkins and Christopher Bird devote a section to this concept, claiming plants are tuned to the music of the spheres, and referencing many examples from science and folklore connecting music and plants. The book inspired a nature documentary of time-lapse plant growth accompanied by music by Stevie Wonder. Then Wonder released the soundtrack in 1979 as Journey Through the Secret Life of Plants. And though Stevie Wonder didn't make this album specifically with plants as the intended audience, we'll listen to an excerpt anyway because it is really, really good.
A species smaller than the eye can see, or larger than most living things, and yet we take from it without consent our shelter, food, habiliment. But who am I to doubt or question the inevitable be. For these are but a few discoveries we find inside the secret life of man.
And for my last, most recent example, in 2020, the Uccelli String Quartet put on a performance of Giacomo Puccini's Chrysanthemums for an audience of more than 2,000 houseplants in Barcelona's Gran Teatre del Liceu. This is one of the pieces that Tracy discussed earlier. This unconventional audience was a response to the COVID-19 pandemic lockdowns and the resulting lockdowns. This performance took place just as places were starting to open up again and was somewhat symbolic. Following the concert, all of the plants were donated to frontline healthcare workers. And so nowadays you can easily find multiple hour-long videos and recordings online that you can play for your plant, covering all sorts of styles. And of course, you can also try playing music for your plants yourself and seeing how they respond to your performance.
Some works use plants in the creation of music itself, like leaves, stems, seeds, and twigs can be used as instruments. I'd like to talk a little bit about two different compositions that use greenery to make music. John Cage's piece, Child of Tree, explores the relationship between nature and indeterminate music. The entirety of this piece is improvised. However, musicians will still reference a score while preparing to perform it. We'll take a look at that score in just a moment, but before you see it, it's important to understand the concept of indeterminacy. Cage defines the term as the ability of a piece to be performed in substantially different ways. Composers using indeterminacy in their work will provide different variables to choose from. It's up to the musician to choose which are appropriate for their performance. This means that no two performances of the piece will be the same. Many different elements of a composition can be indeterminate, such as the length of the piece, the tempo, and in this case, even the instruments that are used. Let's take a look at what this piece looks like. The score for Child of Tree probably looks quite a bit different from other scores that you've seen. Cage doesn't write out any notes, clefs, or staves that you would see in traditional Western notation. Instead, he opts to write out instructions for the performer. Several of the sentences are crossed out, and his handwriting is pretty difficult to read. It could be argued, though, that this adds to the indeterminate nature of the piece. One of the big elements left up to the performer's discretion is the selection of the instruments. One of the instruments used must be a cactus with spines that can be plucked with a toothpick. Whether the cactus is dry or alive is left up to choice. The other instrument that Cage insists upon is a poinciana tree pod that can be used as a rattle. The rest of the 8 instruments are chosen by the performer. Another indeterminate element of this piece is actually not up to choice, but is instead decided by the flip of a coin. The musician will flip a coin and use tables provided in the score to determine the length of each section of their 8-minute performance. Cage states that the instruments clarify the time structure, meaning that the performer will signal the shift between sections of the work by which instruments they're using at that point. Ultimately, Cage writes that the improvisation is the performance, emphasizing the interactions between the performer and the instruments or plants that they have chosen. And we'll watch a short section from one particular performance of Child of Tree. All right, moving on from Child of Tree, let's take a look at a piece that directly references it. High Priest of Sound, Dr. Paul Rudy, composed his piece, Degrees of Separation, Grandchild of Tree, as an homage to Cage's work. While both of these compositions use improvised plucks on cacti spikes, Rudy's piece incorporates contact microphones on the cactus, as well as a backing track that the cactus player can react to. Rudy's work also favors improvisation over indeterminacy, meaning that while the performer will come up with the rhythms and rate at which to pluck the cactus by themselves, Rudy gives strict instructions for other elements of their performance. Enamored by the use of plucked cactus spines in Cage's original composition, Rudy decided to place the sound at the heart of his work, which means that the cactus is pretty much the only thing that the musician is going to be interacting with, rather than having other greenery on stage with them. However, if the cactus was not amplified, its sound would not reach the ears of the audience. In his words, Grandchild of Tree explores the relationship between natural objects and their unnatural extension. Looking at the score for Grandchild of Tree, we can see Rudy's instructions for performing this piece are much easier to understand at first glance than Cage's. Their layout of when specific actions should begin happening in the piece, rather than having the performer flip a coin to figure that out for themselves. There are even instructions for lighting. Nearly every aspect of the piece is thought out and meticulously accounted for. However, improvisation is still emphasized. One of the first instructions given on the timeline is to explore the cactus, which will look and sound differently for each performance. And now we'll listen to a short clip from this piece.
Thank you, Audrey. So plants and music have come a really long way. And if you have attended any of the previous previous presentations, you heard other ways that plants can make music with their by translating biodata into music, like with the work of Joe Patitucci. So if you missed those lectures, I've been assured that they will also be on YouTube at a later date. And so this brings us nearly to the end of our presentation, Beats and Botany. We hope you learned something about the intersection of plants and music, whether it's plants inspiring music or music inspiring plants, or plants as even part of the music making process. Most of the material we found originally at the we found at the UMKC libraries. And if you want to know more on this topic, we encourage you to visit your local library for inspiration and for resources. If you want to know more about the specific resources that we used, you can, there's a shared link, I think, either at the end of the presentation or in the chat. You can also just search UMKC and Beats and Botany, and that should pull up the results. And on that webpage, there's also a SoundCloud link or a SoundCloud playlist there is a link to the SoundCloud playlist. So you can hear a lot more examples than we had time to share here. So, and that's it. Thank you so much to the United States Botanic Garden and Courtney Burris for inviting us to join you today. And thank you all for attending our presentation. I speak for myself and Tracy and Audrey that we had a really great time digging into this topic, and we hope you learned something new as well. And so now I think we're ready for any questions that may have come up as we talked.
Thank you all so much. This was incredible. What a journey. And to hear all of the music that's associated with this. I was sharing with you all earlier that I just was not expecting the swing music for plants. That just was not a thing. And just all of the pleasant surprises and seeing, Stevie Wonder and just hearing about classical music and how this has been a thing for humans, like kind of digging into this topic for over 100 years. It's just incredible work. So thank you. We did have some questions about a range of things. So let's go ahead and get started here. It sounds like the media library houses a lot of different formats. Is there any effort to digitize any of the recordings? Anybody?
I think that's something that the MAR Sound Archive would focus more on than the particular section of the music library we all worked in. I knew some people who worked there, and they would talk about doing that occasionally.
Yeah, the digitization, there's that word, the digitization of music, it is quite an endeavor, making sure things go from, and sometimes it's even cooler to have it in the original packaging. I think I remember seeing in you all's exhibit, did you all actually have like records? Yeah. Sometimes that's super cool to have. But it's also, you also have a SoundCloud. So I think that's an attempt of some of the things to digitize there. But that's a really good question, because we want to try to archive these findings as much as we can. And sometimes doing it the digital way feels safer, right? It feels like, okay, it's going to last for a little while longer. So that was a great question. We also talked about, was there any pop music considered for this exhibit? It sounds like you have some contributors here, like Poison Ivy or Kiss from a Rose by Seal. Did any of those other songs come up?
Yeah, I think we try, like Tracy said, we try to do a really wide range of types of music. Traditionally, our collection has focused more on classical music and jazz, because that is what the conservatory has focused on, and the library supports the conservatory. But like, I think Rolling Stones has an album called Flowers, and there was a lot of different examples that, of course, aren't coming to my head right this second. But that we did try to make sure that we represent a wide range of styles, of voices, of inspiration, eras, time periods, as Tracy talked about. And so, yeah, pop music would definitely be a part of that. It's just because we don't have access to that necessarily, it doesn't come up as much as classical music, jazz, avant-garde.
And so with that, how were other people's reactions? Like once they came in and they saw this exhibit, what were their reactions like?
It's always fun to see what people pick up from the display based on the various displays that we do. And this was one that, like, there's a lot of visual aspects, and so people really were hands-on. Like, they would pick up the books, flip through them, see the artwork, see the photos of plants, have a better idea about what we're trying to do. The plant craft book especially is just, if you have never seen that, I recommend everyone check that out from the library because it's just visually so cool.
And you said, what book was this? Was it Plant Craft?
Mm-hmm.
So we said, very cool. Yeah, if actually, Tracy, are you still sharing if you're still sharing, we would love to go back to like what the exhibit setup looked like. Let's see if we can go
So
back.
you can kind of
let's
see the, yeah.
Yeah.
And
It's
then
so
from
kinesthetic and
inside,
hands-on.
this one.
That's what it was, Plant Craft. Got it. Yeah, I wonder if we can find that in some public libraries. Very cool. And those of you who are in the audience who are there in Kansas, well, now you know where to go. Because you
And
know
like we
where to
said,
find
there's
it.
an album that goes along with the book.
This is incredible stuff. About how long did you all have this on display?
We would typically have, when we were doing it, it would be about 2 months. Material would be on display. And also material, like displays could change because a lot of the material we had on display was circulating. So if somebody saw something and was interested in it, they could totally check it out, take it back to their dorm or their apartment or their house or whatever. And then we would move things around to accommodate, I mean, that was the whole point, is to get material into people's hands to make them think about things in a slightly different way. So
Yeah, because I'm sure, like, even when you think about the Cactus Jazz pieces, this came up in the chat. How were those received by the public? Because some people might say, well, that's not music. But from a music conservatory perspective, I'm sure you all have a point of view about that.
Yeah, so personally, I'm really passionate about contemporary music, such as the John Cage and Paul Rudy works. It can be polarizing even among music students, but I think in general, people are pretty open-minded and willing to like view other works through just a creative and experimental lens. So I thought this display was a good one for contemporary works like that and kind of to introduce them to people.
Thank you for that. Yeah, one of our folks in the chat wanted to know, did you see anything about music impacting veggies? Did we see anything? Are veggies growing larger? Did anybody do any experiments? What did you all come across?
I'll take that question.
Okay.
Hello, Jack. But I think, so I don't have the list of experiments at hand right now, but I think if you are really interested in that topic, if you look into that topic, a lot of the scientific experiments that happened were driven by this need to increase plant productivity. And so the scientists were looking for ways to make plants grow larger, to bloom sooner, to have deeper roots, to produce bigger fruit. And so a lot of the science that the musicians then took inspiration from was driven by this need to have more productive harvests, essentially. And so looking for different ways and they were looking at all sorts of different aspects, sound and music were one aspect of that. And so if you are interested in that particularly, then there's literally like 100 years of research to go back and look through to see what worked and what different. And a lot of like, so the first examples that we had were from India, but then I found other research that people used that in Minnesota or Kansas or whatever, wherever they wanted to produce more crop.
Wow. That's it. So thinking about you all's research journey, right? Like, how has this changed you a little bit, or has it? You know, when from the beginning of this research back in 2020, right, 2021, to even now revisiting it 3 years later, how does that impact your relationship with plants?
Honestly, one of the big things about displays is we have fun. Like, it's just a fun idea. It's not supposed to be stressful.
Yeah.
We just bounce ideas off of each other. We all do research. But I was a student when I started working in the library at UMKC. I was doing a doctorate, and so it was something. Doing these displays helped me in my personal research search and helped me discover ways to find other information and like different ways of doing research that helped me in my like dissertation and things like that. Um, it it's just fun. Like at the end of
Yeah.
the day, these were
Yeah.
all fun. You saw the list of examples. We really tried to get our student workers to come up with ideas, and then we would always have a list. And then if we were like, we couldn't really decide what to do next, we had a list to go back to, and it was a good time.
Yeah. One thing kind of led to the other, it led to the other. That's so cool.
Well, and you were talking about how it changed us. We all were plant enthusiasts coming into this.
Yeah.
But for this display, book displays, I don't know if you've ever been in a public library. I hope everyone has been to a public library, but sometimes they're just a table with books, right?
Right.
And so we always tried to go a little deeper, have a narrative, have lots of different examples for people. And for this particular one, we brought in some of our own personal plants to sort of share. And then some of these plants still live at the library today, even though
Wow.
we have all moved on. They are continuing to share the space with the current library employees. So it's still there, still producing oxygen and greenery and being taken care of. So that's really great.
So incredible.
Oh, and I should mention just one last thing. When we talk about plants as instruments, most instruments started life as plants. They're made from wood, string, maracas, violins, or even the origin of the instrument. If you think about a flute, a flute is all metal. The first flutes were made from reeds. So the instruments or the music and plant symbiosis, I guess, has continued since the first instruments.
Wow. This is true. This is true. And just to bring these two ideas together, it kind of feels new, but as you just stated, it's not really. Not really. Audrey, how about you? We got to hear from Tracy and Libby, but just how has this journey impacted you and your connection with plants?
Yeah. Well, I listen to music a lot while I'm doing almost anything, but especially when I'm like outside in the garden doing work like that. So I guess it made me think more about like what I'm listening to, and how it could relate to some of the research we've done. Also, I remember taking home a few house plants after we did this display. So.
Yeah, does anybody find yourselves playing music with your plants? Like wondering if they're listening?
Yeah, so now I'm always thinking about like, how is this affecting the house plants? Am I having a positive influence on them?
Yeah, I do have a lot of plants right next to the record player, so they heard a lot of Stevie as we were listening to it.
Very cool. We're still looking through our chat here. I want to make sure that I did not forget Any questions? You got a shout out from Paul, just saying that it's nice to hear Paul Rudy's music. Good to hear him. Come on out. And just a lot of shout outs for exploring this overall. Audrey, it was really refreshing to hear like this was your idea kind of coming in, huh?
Yeah, well, we all pretty much collaborated on it, but I
Yeah.
think it was me wearing the Plantasia shirt to work one day,
Mm.
and Libby was like, "That would be a great idea."
What brought Plantasia into your life, Audrey? Like,
I don't know, just I love a lot of different music, and synthesizer music has always been very interesting to me, like stuff like Wendy Carlos, her soundtracks, and yeah, the Plantasia album is beautiful. I think everyone should give it a listen.
yeah. Yeah, same. It's like one of those things you can just kind of play in the background. Yeah, yeah. And even with the newer MIDI devices that folks are using, like it does kind of sound that way because that is the way that it's programmed to sound. So it's something about that sound that is kind of soothing to us human ears. And, just to kind of replicate it in this new age plant music is something really cool that we see happening too. Well, we want to thank you all so much for being here. Thank you all so much for the work that you have done and just the fun that you've had and putting more fun into our world. And as we know, we need it. Your collection will live on because it has now been digitized, right? It's online, so folks can find the information from the UMKC library and Beats and Botany by just searching. It's also in our links. To learn about the USBG's future online programs, of course, visit usbg.gov/programs. And please, you are going to receive a little survey. Let us know. Tell us about how you felt about this program. And again, you will see this program recorded and posted along with our other programs from the series this summer. And we thank you all so much for sharing your afternoon with us. Thanks again, Beats and Botany team. Good to see you all again. All righty. You all have a great afternoon.